Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox. This week, we're covering just how miserable our friends in HR are, discussing whether for big companies, felonies are no big deal, finding out another reason not to mess with Texas, and a Florida woman's real-life attempt to act out Carrie Underwood's song Before He Cheats. But first, Tom, how has your week been, and what is the most interesting development?
Well, Chrissy, I've thoroughly enjoyed the Olympics. I've been a fan since I was a kid. I can remember Olga Korbut. I can remember Nadia Comaneci. The gymnasts have just been fabulous. Obviously, Simone Biles, but the entire American team, plus the Brazilian team, plus the Italian team. It's just been a fabulous display of athleticism, power, and grace. I'm a huge track guy, and field guy. And so that started, and 1500 was my race growing up. So, although we called it the mile back then. That's going on. We got the world's fastest man. We have the world's fastest woman. The U.S. basketball team is rocking and rolling. The U.S. women's soccer team is in the finals. It's been a great time. I've just forgotten how much I enjoy the Olympics. I don't remember if I didn't watch Tokyo or I just, with no crowd, it wasn't too much, but it's just been great.
I've had a great time watching it too. I've been excited about the newly transformed synchronized swimming to artistic swimming designation, and breaking, of course, right? Brand new sports, all good times. It's been really, really fun to watch for sure.
Yep. So I'm not even sure where to start with this story because it was in the New York Times, and it was entitled "HR is Making You Miserable." Well, guess what? HR is miserable, and the whole thing is miserable. And like many things, it got accelerated during the pandemic. It did not start with the pandemic, but it certainly got accelerated. Pre-pandemic, we had the first wave of not AI assisted screening, but just rote, nonsensical, non-thinking screening. Like, in our field, it's top 5%, top law school. That's horse hockey. And it's screening of, well, you have to have a 4-year college degree and you have to have this or have to have that. It doesn't take into account any of the subtleties and differences in humans. But now it's even worse because of the AI tools that are being used for hiring. How you can get past that, no one knows. Usually the HR department doesn't know. HR is cranking out more memos about things you have to do now. You have to do this and you have to do that. And we don't know what we're doing. And so when there's blowback against the company, it usually is against HR because they're the one having to push out these new initiatives. So both sides of the fence are just miserable. And the use of AI in hiring and screening and promoting is just horrible. And people are feeling like it's not fair. And they have no idea what the criteria are now because it's completely opaque. So, but the really article was not just about me bitching about HR. It was about really HR professionals and the pressure they are under. They used to claim we were the department of no, Dr. No in the land of no. Well, now it's HR. And it's a lot of rote numbers, a lot of forms you have to fill out, a lot of surveys that really serve no purpose because nobody's looking at them. It's a complete tick the box exercise. So some real dissatisfaction, both from the employee base towards HR and equally important from HR. And if we start losing HR professionals because of the pressure, because of breakdowns, because it's just not worth it, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, Tom, this article took place basically at an HR convention in Las Vegas, and they kept going to cocktail parties in the scenarios. And I think if I were at that conference, I'd be at cocktail parties the whole time too, considering how incredibly depressing the whole thing seemed. I was really surprised to see that they said that the highest levels of attrition in professional jobs are in HR, that they have the highest turnover levels. So I think One thing that did bother me a bit was that all the things they said people hated, which is assigning training, sending out policies, getting attestations, requiring rules to be followed and procedures. That sounds an awful lot like what we do in compliance. Um, Honestly, it sounds a whole lot like what we do. So hopefully our folks do tend to be happier. So I mean, I don't know quite what the difference is there, but the statistics we covered a few episodes ago, where the big surveys say, frankly, people in compliance feel like what they're doing is meaningful and matters. So I'm glad that, despite fact we're in the same kind of boat, we seem to be happier campers.
Kristy, I think it's because we, and when I say we, I mean the compliance profession, I mean Kristy Grant-Hart, I mean Tom Fox, have worked very hard to, number one, demonstrate we're the friend of business and operations, but even more importantly, show the value, the real ROI value. I mean, you've talked about operationalizing compliance forever. I've talked about more effective compliance equates to more efficient business processes, equates to greater profitability. And I think compliance is now seen as a business enabler. And unfortunately, right now, HR is seen as not one.
Hmm. Well, I'm happier on my side of the fence. Bless you, HR people, but I'm sticking to my side of this fence right now. So alrighty. Well, we're going to go from one slightly depressing article to another. And it's very controversial. It's up on my LinkedIn today, and people are commenting all about it because it's a biting review from the Wall Street Journal titled, "For Big Companies, Felony Convictions Are a Mere Footnote." So the very first line of the article says, quote, "The taint of corporate criminal conviction isn't what it used to be," unquote. The author frames the story in light of the Boeing challenges, including their failed deferred prosecution agreement that turned into a prosecution and big settlement. The article's main point is that for companies that are essentially too big to fail, corporate prosecution and fines simply aren't enough of a deterrent. The author points to the fact that Boeing couldn't be debarred or suspended as a federal contractor because, frankly, it's just too important to the Department of Defense. And it's not just Boeing that has had this issue. So in 2015, several banks were given waivers from the SEC after market rigging scandals because they were such big players in mutual fund management. And what else was going to happen? And as you and I have repeatedly screamed about, monitors are obviously unbelievably rare for companies these days. So the deterrent threat there is genuinely moot for the most part. The author notes that shareholders and customers, frankly, just don't care about a company pleading guilty. And in short, it is just not that big a deal for a company to have a felony conviction because if no one cares, then it just doesn't matter. So, Tom, do you agree? Is he right? Do convictions not matter? I mean, reading what he said, I'm kind of inclined to think he might have a point.
I think he does have a point, Kristy. And I think part of it is that 10 years ago, maybe, or maybe even longer, further back, a guilty plea would have been seen as something incredibly negative. And now, because we've had so many deferred prosecution agreements and things that are short of a criminal prosecution, but you've admitted to essentially the conduct in your plea agreement or your DPA, or not your plea agreement, your DPA, your NPA, or your declination, that that sort of taint really washed away. The issue with Boeing, he is spot on that not only can Boeing not be given a penalty which would prevent it or debar it from U.S. government work, the U.S. government cannot debar Boeing. It's America's largest airplane manufacturer. At least during the financial crisis of 2008, there were multiple banks, and theoretically, you could have put one bank out of business and we'd still have a banking system. Well, you put Boeing out of business, or at least debar them from doing work with the federal government, you've got nowhere else you can go. Boeing has bought up everybody, or there's been consolidation, and it's go to Airbus, a foreign manufacturer. All those jobs, all that money, all that everything. So it is a very difficult situation, and we have talked about, and I have talked about extensively, what Boeing needs to do to turn it around. And there has got to be a way for the government to make real change in a corporation that is as toxic a culture and has done such bad things as Boeing to get to the position where they have to take a criminal plea. But whether it's too big to fail, whether it's a mere footnote, whether it's banks behaving badly, whether it's a plea agreement that we're just going to waive and let you keep doing business, whatever it is, it ain't working. And he's absolutely right to call that out.
Yeah. I mean, I keep always thinking about that's just the way that we do things here. That's, is the cost of doing business, are these fines? I mean, we have to figure out a way to make this more stinging. And I think right now it's a little bit difficult.
I would say that the senior executives, would never work in that industry again. But if you've got a $63 million golden parachute, maybe you don't need to work.
Maybe not so much. Let's talk about other very, very wealthy people making interesting choices. Tom, what's going on with Tesla?
So, that's almost a minute by minute podcast, and I'm not sure we'd have enough time to go through everything today. But what intrigued me and what I wanted to talk about was the Elon Musk pay package issue that, once again, we visited about on this podcast, where a Delaware court said it didn't say he wasn't entitled to it. They said that the shareholders had not been given fair notice and fully explained what the pay package was. And there were questions about, was the board too close? So Tesla went back and gave another shareholder vote for a reduced pay package because the stock price has been reduced, and that passed. Well, now Tesla, and to me, a very strange legal move, wants to have the first decision thrown out because they said the vote overruled it. Well, a corporate vote can never overrule a court decision, period, ever, not even in Texas. It's just beyond belief. Now, that doesn't mean that the judge can't accept the second vote, but no, it's not going to overturn the first case. And guess what? The plaintiff's lawyers get to collect on that money from the first case. And maybe that's what this is all about, because they're looking for $1 billion plus payday that they are entitled to because they were the winning lawyers in that first lawsuit. So can a corporation ever overrule a court case by vote? Well, in spite of the corrupt Supreme Court, the answer is still no.
I liked the words stockholder democracy, which was the argument. Apparently, according to this article, the judge kept saying, wait, hold on. Can you give me a single legal theory under which this is something I should overrule myself? And they said it's a stockholder democracy prevailed. That's not a thing. So it's baffling. It's genuinely baffling. Oh, Tesla. Okay. So in terms of what's going on in another part of the compliance world, let's talk a little bit about OFAC. Calling all sanctions managers, your job continues to get harder, but you already knew that, didn't you? My second article comes from our friend Michael Volkov, and it's titled OFAC Releases Guidance on Extended Statute of Limitations and Forthcoming Record Changes. So a few months ago, I covered the new 21st Century Peace Through Strength Act, just comes right off the tongue, which extended the statute of limitation for most sanctions violations from 5 to 10 years. So it doubled it. Compliance officers and pundits were confused because it wasn't clear when the starting point was for that 10-year statute. So OFAC has now responded, and here's the rule. The 10-year statute of limitations applies to any violation starting from April 24th, 2019. So for anyone not great at math, that's exactly 5 years prior to the signing of the new law in 2024. What does this mean for compliance officers? Well, Mr. Volkov recommends updating your record-keeping requirements, as well as making sure your due diligence and M&A procedures are updated to account for that new long statutory period. So, Tom, I was trying to imagine this 10-year statute of limitations for sanctioned violations. It seems unlikely to me that someday in 2034, a company will be prosecuted for something in 2024. Do you think that this makes a big difference, this shift in statute of limitations? How do you see this as playing out?
Well, I am a little aghast that you put it that way. That in 2034, a company could be prosecuted. But the reality is in FCPA world, we saw cases where the DOJ would take information back as far as the turn of the century, literally, and it could be 10 years. So as a matter of practice, we have seen a long, long time for the DOJ to take a retrospective look back, even if it didn't meet the definition of a 5-year statute. So my distaste for this 10 years is ameliorated a little bit, but it's still incredibly difficult. Obviously, all of the issues around investigations, talking to people who were there, uncovering the facts, defending yourself are going to be incredibly difficult on that type of 10-year statute. And that's the reason you have statute of limitation in civil cases for what's called staleness. If I could ask you to recall some of your criminal procedure. And because I remember the state of Indiana has a 20-year statute on breach of contract claims. And we howled about that. How would you ever, go back 20 years? Here in the great state of Texas, it's 4 years, and that's on the outer limits. Most states, it's 2 years. So a 10-year statute will make it incredibly difficult, and your record keeping will have to be just pristine.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I think is with bribery, it's a little bit more straightforward, but sanctions change constantly. The politics of sanctions change constantly. People get off the sanctions list or put back on it. I mean, I appreciate that they want to have the leniency to be able to make those calls longer term, but I think we're much more likely to see longer term bribery investigations from 10 years ago than we certainly are with violations of the sanctions law. So we'll see.
So, Kristy, I found a really interesting article in a publication called the India Times, and it posits that inequality contributes to corruption. And the reason this attracted me so much is I have long held that corruption leads to crime, which leads to terrorism. And I saw that play out multiple times, I think as far back as 9/11. But here it's an even more nuanced analysis because it says that income inequality leads to corruption. And I hadn't really thought of income inequality as leading to corruption because I had focused, not unsurprisingly, on FCPA corruption. But in other countries in the world, commercial business to business corruption, and here the article is based in India, is equally pervasive. And when you have that type of corruption, it's extraordinarily difficult for a level playing field or someone who's not involved in corruption to even get to the table to start to play. And so it really got me thinking. There's another level to this, and whether it's why on earth would someone walk from Venezuela to try to get to the United States? Well, it's because life is so bad in Venezuela. And if your income inequality is so bad because of corruption, it leads you to engage in crime and then to terrorism. I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed at some level.
Yeah, this article was really interesting. So it was really heavy into research. And one of the pieces that surprised me was the findings relating to education. So specifically, the authors note that the fact that people with higher education perceive more corruption than those with lower education, which I thought that's really strange. The article posited that this is because people with higher education may be more informed about things like insider trading or graft in government or reading and potentially, I suppose, newspapers and things about lobbying by big business. What do you think about their speculations of why people who are more educated perceive that there is more corruption around them?
That part really surprised me as well. And I don't really have a good answer other than the pervasiveness of business to business corruption may be so great in India or other countries that it's just a part of doing business. I remember in the 80s, a colleague of mine from Mexico, that there's the American way of doing business and the Mexican way of doing business. And our way is frankly easier. And, we both knew he was talking about. So maybe that's the reason. But I was a little bit surprised by that finding as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. All right. Shall we move to Texas, Tom? Shall we go back to big tech in Texas, that winning combination?
The great state of Texas stands firm for the little guy.
Indeed. So my next article is from CNBC, and it's titled Meta Agrees to 1.4 billion settlement in Texas biometric data lawsuit over Facebook images. So what's it about? Between 2011 and 2021, Facebook ran a program called Tag Suggestions, where people uploaded pictures or videos, or when they uploaded pictures or videos up to Facebook, it would suggest whether one of these people's names. And what it was meant to do was to encourage people to tag their friends so that the post reached more people. Now, I remember this well. My husband does not have a Facebook account, but my mother-in-law does. So Facebook constantly asked me if my husband was my mother-in-law when I uploaded photos, which was very creepy to me. And feeling creepy was how Texas experienced it as well. So the state successfully sued Facebook's owner Meta for violating the Texas Capture or Use of Biometric Identifier Act. That law requires consent from people whose biometric data is being collected or used. So the settlement against Meta is reported to be the largest ever obtained as a result of an action by a single state. There you go, Texas. So I suppose, Tom, this is proof positive not to mess with Texas. Personally, I don't think that companies are paying enough attention to laws relating to the collection or use of biometric data. There are so many state laws relating to this, and I don't think there's enough focus on this. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. Although we have the most corrupt attorney general in the United States as our attorney general in the great state of Texas, the attorney general's office did a great job settling this case. Facebook is the poster child, but TikTok, I don't think LinkedIn, but Instagram, which is a part of Facebook, all of those just routinely scrape data, and they scraped it without consent. But they scraped it without informing anyone they were doing it. They scraped it without consent. They have now uploaded it. And these laws, this is not a new Texas law. This law is on the books. The Illinois biometric law has been on the books for quite some time. And companies routinely violated it, and Meta got caught, and they paid, like you said, $1.4 billion. So I'm glad somebody's finally watching.
Yep. All right. So we have a new trial program, pilot program. The DOJ is moving around with all these things that they're doing. What's the latest, Tom?
So we had a major announcement from the Department of Justice last week announcing a 3-year pilot program for a whistleblower incentive program. Basically, if you come to the Department of Justice in one of 4 areas, I'm not going to get them all right, but healthcare that's not covered by key TAM, financial fraud, FCPA and FEPA, and there's one other that escapes me. That's what they're looking for, because most other. There we go.
Anti-money laundering is the fourth.
Okay. Most others are covered by current laws and current whistleblower incentive statutes for various agencies, FinCEN, CFTC, obviously the SEC, even the FAA. Others have whistleblower incentive programs. And if you come in and you give new information, original information to the Department of Justice, you're eligible for an award. There's no floor. I think it's from $1 million to $10 million. It's up to 30%. Above that, it drops. And then there's a cap at $500 million. All of that's at the discretion of the Department of Justice. The interesting part for me, Kristy, and this is the one I really wanted to visit with you about at some length, is what does this mean for compliance programs? Because if a whistleblower internally blows the whistle, as 90% do, at least 90% that go to the SEC, then goes to the Department of Justice, the company has 120 days from the filing with the DOJ to investigate and self-disclose the matter to still take advantage of the corporate enforcement policies around the declination, if they meet the other 3 criteria, which are extensive remediation, extensive cooperation, and profit disgorgement. So if someone reports internally, I think there is increased pressure on companies to get it right. Because if they fumble F around and they don't do anything, or if they don't take it seriously, or it gets sent off to HR to do the investigation, and it turns out that it's something very serious like an FCPA allegation or violation, the company is going to be perceived as not having taken compliance seriously, having a pathetic whistleblower system and internal investigative protocol, all leading to, a higher fine and penalty. That's sort of question one. What pressure does this put on compliance professionals? But then let me take it in a different direction, because the amount of money a whistleblower is eligible for is based on, quote, forfeiture, end quote. So the question I have is profit disgorgement of forfeiture. Because if a company does, within the 120 days, investigate and self-disclose, making itself eligible for the declination, if profit disgorgement is not a forfeiture, the whistleblower doesn't get any reward, because the forfeiture language came out of an existing statute which allow the payment by the Department of Justice. This is not a new law or mandate by Congress. So, and I don't know the answer to that. I posed that question to Matt Kelly. I posed that question to Mary Inman. I posed that question to several others, because there's a disconnect to me in the language. Maybe they are the same thing, and I hope they are the same thing. But if they are not, I think whistleblowers run a real risk of not getting anything. But let me circle back to the compliance program, because I think there is now incredibly increased pressure on compliance programs and compliance officers when that whistle is blown, when someone raises their hand and speaks up, when that allegation comes in, no matter how it's made.
Yeah, 100%. I think that also the media is going to start to pay more attention to this. I mean, I was thinking about the biggest FCPA settlement so far this year was $661 million. That could be $200 million for a whistleblower. That is a very big deal. And I believe when the SEC took a look at it, that internal whistleblowing didn't stop people from getting their awards, right? If they were still going to the external regulators. So the fact is there's no protection for a company in that respect. So we really need to basically make sure that our employees feel heard and are satisfied with what happens, because it is incredible pressure on the compliance department, and to have really good tone from the top that takes things seriously. From the forfeiture question, that is an interesting legal question, but I also think that they never are guaranteed anything. I mean, when you look at this is all discretionary, right? So they don't have to get anything anyway, even if there is a giant win on this. And so I don't know, maybe there's a tiny glimmer of people not wanting to go because they might not get something, and that actually creates higher risk for them if they're going to put their career on the line or something like that, and not necessarily get anything out of it. But I think that for compliance officers, the message is more and more and more, just continue to talk about speak up, continue to talk about non-retaliation, continue to ask for information, and to be a place where people feel safe. And for our poor friends in HR, as we heard, they're miserable. We don't want them doing these investigations. If it's this kind of work, we want to be taking the happy folks in compliance and letting us onto these kind of difficult motions, because there's no easy answers here.
Now, I would re-emphasize this is a pilot program, a 3-year pilot program, and the DOJ has made clear that they reserve the right to make tweaks or changes to the program as appropriate. I know there's a whistleblowing lawyer or attorney lobby who I think has already raised these questions, and they're in dialogue with the Department of Justice. So we could see some changes, but the absolute discretion of the DOJ, to me, is troubling, because in the last administration, the SEC was clearly against whistleblower bounties, and Jay Clayton tried to change the rules, and the outcry was so large that he backed off. But under a second Trump administration with a corrupt attorney general, they could make the decision that no U.S. company is going to pay any sort of fine or penalty, or we're not going to pay any bounties out, and that's it.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, because obviously the SEC recently said, hey, there's another big whistleblower award. It's $37 million, but we never know anything about for what, when, how, what did they say? So even if there were discretionary choices to not give anyone any of this kind of money or bounty money, we would never know why or when or how. There's complete discretion. There just isn't transparency around it. So tricky stuff. Okay.
So, okay, what do you got?
Let's move to the rise of the machines. New York story in the New York Times asks the question: will AI kill meaningless jobs? Which the article spends an inordinate amount of time talking about what is meaningless. So basically, it's the story of lots of people who call themselves people with meaningless jobs, things that are monotonous, repetitive, and that people see them as useless or unimportant. So the article goes from optimistic to pessimistic and back again. On one hand, AI may free people from soul crushing work they hate. On the other hand, Goldman Sachs estimates that generative AI could eventually replace 300 million jobs globally. That's a lot of folks. And people say, well, what the heck are those people going to do? The article responds to its own question by noting that technology shifts have always scared people, and thus far, technology has created new jobs and opportunities that were never seen before the new technology emerged. I thought the most interesting story in the article is one of a writer who supported her magazine writing career by drafting emails for a business owner on the side for 50 cents a word. That's a lot, by the way. My emails are long. She was let go when he discovered Chat GPT. So a little bit of a shame for her in that the AI taking over. The article argued that jobs requiring human empathy would be easy to replace, which I found peculiar, Tom, because people get burned out, but machines don't care if they're being screamed at by irate customers all day long. So that kind of made sense. But the article also talked about therapists and other people. And I don't know about you, but I really cannot see myself asking Siri to help me talk about my childhood trauma. So I think that maybe it's a little bit off on that one. But do we fear the rise of the machines with AI and quote meaningless jobs? Or do you think that this is overblown as well as so many things that relate to AI?
Obviously, you and I have not gotten the memo on Skynet becoming self-aware and taking over the world. So, no, AI is not going to do this. They're going to replace jobs, you bet. Whether they're 6 billion, is it 6 billion now?
300
Or are we up
million,
to
they said. Yes,
no,
300
no, 8
million.
billion people in the
Oh,
world?
that's right. Yes, of course.
So, are they going to take some of these repetitive jobs? You bet. And I'm not going to pretend to say people, well, it gives you more time for leisure time, so you can go out and hang out and listen to Taylor Swift music. But it gives you the opportunity to change your career. It gives you an opportunity to do something else. It gives you an opportunity to be more productive, more efficient. It's made me more efficient because I have greater productivity on my podcast production. So it's a wide variety, but it's a tool. It's like any other tool. Better, faster, quicker, but it's just a tool. Stop it.
Stop being so worried. It's going to be fine. Calm down, everyone.
And when Skynet goes live and becomes self-aware, please let me know.
I think you'll know, Tom. I think you'll know.
Okay. So for our next story, the Serious Fraud Office has brought charges against Glencore traders. And what's interesting about this, Kristy, is it's, I think, a couple of years after the settlement for Glencore. It's a Serious Fraud Office, but Glencore is a UK listed company, not a US listed company. So that may be one of the reasons. And it's against the traders. 4 traders were allegedly bribing to get trades through. Interesting prosecution by the SFO, not against senior management. These traders made a lot of money, but Glencore made a lot of money. So we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Yep, that is a long running saga for sure. And do you know what else has a long running saga, Tom?
Our friend, Florida man.
Florida man, but this time it's Florida woman. All righty. We have gender diversity in our Floridians.
His girlfriend.
Yes, his girl. Wow, that's true. Right. Okay. So this time we have Florida woman. She is clearly a fan of Carrie Underwood, the singer of the iconic song Before He Cheats. So side note, this is one of my favorite go-to songs in karaoke. It is always a crowd pleaser. That one and I Will Survive. You're welcome. Okay. Florida woman Alana Owen got super mad at her boyfriend when he came home drunk. So he allegedly told someone nearby that she heard he could have more women. She wasn't having any of it. The fight escalated with her boyfriend until police came and he was arrested for assault. She was real not happy several days later when she allegedly smashed the windows of her former boyfriend's car, cut open the driver's seat, and dented the car's body. She wanted the world to know exactly what she thought of him, so she keyed the word cheater in all capital letters on the man's car. And lastly, on the driver's side of the car, she scratched two words reflecting her feelings about their romantic life. The first one was little, and the last one starts with a D. Our Carrie Underwood loving Florida woman was charged with criminal mischief and released on bond. Florida men, you have been warned. Don't cheat. If you do, you may be another song statistic.
Well, Kristy, I think that's a great way for us to end this episode.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.